this module, we're going to cover some of React Auth. And what I want to do with this module is show you how to initialize a new project, of course. I want us to get in the habit of building new projects every time, at least until we build kind of a larger project together. So you can see all my projects that I work on all the time. I kind of produce a lot of software. And here's an old project. But no worries, let's go ahead and make a new project, and this is going to be called React-Auth. I want to go over some concepts in React and teach you guys some auth. So I'm going to open up my terminal by pressing Control backtick or the tilde button on Mac, and I'll type in npx create react app and /. That's going to be into this project. If I want to make a new folder or a new directory, I would just name new project here, or new folder to be more specific. Whatever you want to name your project, you could put it there. But I'll just say / to say, in this folder, I want to install this project. So we'll watch it install. And just like in the Tailwind bit, we're going to go ahead and download Tailwind again. Again, I want you guys to get used to it. So I'm going to pull up my Google Chrome and just Google React Tailwind. It popped off into one of my other screens, but here we go. I just Googled React Tailwind, trying to teach you guys to get into searching for your own resources and things you need. So we're doing step 1 where we npx create React app. They're just CDing into the project. All that means is to go into that directory. But we're already in this directory because we did the / instead of naming it my project. So we'll go ahead and skip to step 2 of npm install tailwind.css. If you didn't see the previous module going over Tailwind, I suggest you check it out. There's some good stuff in there and a lot of tips and tricks we're going to pick up on the way. So as this finalizes and loads, we'll see that the React app was successfully downloaded again. Let me give us some space. And we have our src folder. I'm going to go ahead and delete a few things out of it. Clean out the logo. Don't need that. The report web vitals. We don't need that. The test. We don't need that. And the app.test.js. We don't need that as well. We should just be left with these 4 files. And even here, I'm going to do a few things. In the index.js, we're going to remove the web vitals, that line. We're going to remove those lines there. And our index.js should look something like this. Then I'm going to go to the app.js and we're going to remove logo, as you guys have seen, and header to header. Get rid of that. We'll say new app, or better yet, we'll say React-Auth. React-Auth, just like that. And I'm going to install Tailwind. So I just copied that command down and I'm going to place it into our terminal. npm install -d for developer dependency, Tailwind CSS. And the npx Tailwind CSS init is going to configure a Tailwind config file for us. So you see it pop up just right there, Tailwind config.js. And I'm going to copy all this and paste it in, just like what we saw previously. Take the Tailwind directives and put them in our CSS, and we should be good to go. And also we'll npm run start, but we have a couple files open. So I'm going to go ahead and close these out, close all of them out. A fast way of doing that, if you have a bunch of files open, is just to hit Command W on Mac. So I'm going to go back to our app.js. This is where we're going to do a lot of our material here. So we have React-Auth, and we can see it working here. Let's test if Tailwind's working. I'm going to remove the app and say p-10 and bg-500. This is how we know Tailwind is working, because all of our CSS commands here are affecting the DOM. Let's build this application. It's going to be a simple application where we're just going to say login, and we're going to have a user input, a user password, and a login button. But I want to go over some concepts of what auth can look like. So in our parent div, I'm going to say flex-call with-full, just to kind of initialize our project, and min-height screen. And if I do background, let's say -slate 300, we should see the entire screen width taken up. That's what these commands do. And the flex and flex call means all of our elements within our div here. So we'll say element 1 or element 2, they're going to stack up on top of each other, but they're not centered in the screen. So how can we center them in the screen? We could say items-center and justify-center, and that'll bring them in the middle of the screen. If we play with these two things, item-center or justify-center, we could see items-start. We can see what that does. It's going to affect our X and Y axis. Like if we do items-end, it'll go to the end. So you can see all those commands here. Items-baseline, items-stretch, and justify-start. similar thing. It'll go to the top of the project, but we want everything in the middle of the project. So we'll just do items-center and justify-center as well. So any additional element that we include on our project here will actually just stack up on top of each other. It's the easiest way to format CSS in my mind. So as I mentioned, we want a login title. So I'll make it an H1. We'll say font bold and text 3x. And we'll say MB-8 for margin bottom to give us some space between the element below. We're going to make this element below an input. So I'll say class name, background slate. We'll say 900 and we'll say py3 px-8 rounded dash 80 pixels. And I'm going to make these colors a little bit better actually, because these don't look too good. So I'm going to say 100. That's fine, just like that. And I'll say placeholder, user, enter username here. And you can see my prettier is just formatting the file for us automatically. So I'm going to copy this down and we're going to have a password one as well. So enter password here. And finally, below these two elements, we want to add a button and we'll say login. Class name, let's give it some padding. Say py-3 and we'll say px-6 for this one. And background red 500 or 600, rounded MD, and we'll say margin top 8. And of course, text white. And let's give some space between our two input fields. Do you see how they're touching? So we will go ahead and say margin top -8, give some space. Great, so we have a very generic login form. And I'm gonna affect the button a little bit more. We'll say rounded 80 pixels actually. We'll just follow these and we're gonna add a few things. Cursor pointer, transition, and of course, hover, opacity 50, and active scale -90. Great job, guys. So now when we click the button, we can see it move. So we want to have a password here and a username. And let me kind of roughly explain how authentication can work. So basically we're going to have some sort of database, some sort of object that holds data. So let's build that real quick. So I'll say const dummy database, and let's build out this database. I'm going to use an array, and within the array, we're going to build users. So I'll say username. My name is Ryan, but maybe we could say Pags for my last name, and my password will be 123. And we'll have another user. I'll copy that down and say John, and his password will be 456. So dummy database. These are going to be our users within our application. And we need to do a few things first too. We need to make sure that our input fields are collecting a username and our input fields are collecting a password as well. So that's something we'll have to handle here in a moment. But I just want to explain what auth can look like in general, which is going to be this idea where when we log in, we need some function that is going to check into our database and see if that user exists, first of all. And then secondly, if the user that exists has a password associated to that user. Let's go ahead and import some state from React. We'll say import use state from React, and I'll give us some space here. And we'll say const username and set username equals use state. And we'll copy this down and I'll change this to say password and set password. If you're wondering how I edited both of those words so quickly, I just highlighted them, and you can see my IntelliSense is highlighting both. And then I can press Command D if I want to highlight another. And you can see these ones are also highlighted as well. If I press Command D again, it'll highlight those. And if I press Command D one more time, it'll highlight the fourth one. And we even have a fifth one here that I can press Command D and change all of them at once if I need to. But I'm going to undo that. We just want our variable named password. Our value needs to be our username, and onChange needs to be E and set username to event.target.value. And the reason why we're doing this in our inputs is because our value is going to be this variable here. I'm going to post our username right here, which is our state right here. And the onChange value, all we're doing is setting the username, this guy, with this variable. That's all this one does. It just sets up our state here. So when we pass in e.target.value, that's all that each one of these clicks are. So when I press A, you can see that it goes into our input. And we also see it here because here is our username from state, our username state, I should say. So everything I click in here, we should see it show up on the state. That means we're doing this successfully, that we are setting the username state properly. So I'm going to delete that And we're going to do the same thing for the password. So I'll just copy these two down, set username and value, and I'll go ahead and just put password here. We need to set the password because right now we're just setting the username with this field, but this is our password field. We don't want to set the username with this field. We want to set our password. So I'll change it to set password. Just like in the username, if I now say password state and pass in the password into our template, let me give us some space here, we should see the password pop up if I put it in here. So boom, 1, 2, 3, or whatever inputs I put here. So if we've done this successfully, if I have both the password state and copy it down and say username state and change this to username here, we should be able to see both the username and password. So if I say John and 456. Now, of course, these two elements are not being flex called because they're not in elements. They're just out in the open. So if we wrap these both in divs, we should see them stack up on top of each other. Now we can see our username state right here and our password state. I'm going to remove the name state though, because we know it's the state. I'm just showing this to demonstrate that we need this data collected from this input form, and we need to be able to put it anywhere in our application. This is a quick way and something I regularly use to show that my functions are working or my inputs are working. So again, if I put in pags here, I could see that it's working. Let's build the function for our button now. And I'll keep these here for now, but you don't need to. I just want to let you guys know that it's working. So I'll say on click and we'll arrow function into a handle submit function. And this handle submit function is going to be built up here where I'll say function handle submit. It's going to take both of our username and our password. Here I could pass in our username and our password. Every time we click this button, we should see our username and our password. Oh, forgive me, my Console Ninja extension isn't working. If you guys remember, we installed that earlier. The reason why mine isn't working is because I'm changing my Node version for some blockchain projects I've been working on, but forgive me, yours still should be working. And we can ignore this for now, this warning right here. But every time we press the button, we should see whatever we put in here should match this and this. In fact, in our console log statement, I'll say username right here, just to be explicit, and password right here as well. Of course, we need a comma. So if we refresh the server, and if I put in new user and 1, 2, 3 for the password, we should see password, or excuse me, username, new user, and password 1, 2, 3. So in our dummy database, all we want to do with this function is, first of all, just find the user that exists in this dummy database. So if I say dummy database.find user and arrow function into user.username equals our state, which is username. And I know this can be confusing, but maybe I'll say user ID instead of username, just to differentiate from our state and what our database should be holding. So what this is doing is it's going through our database and it's finding and mapping out a user that's matching the user ID to whatever state we put in here. So if I have the state pags, which is basically like saying this, by hard coding the state here of pags would be our username. It's now basically saying this is now equal to pags, and find the user in our database that matches this one. So if I hard code this will definitely find this user. And sometimes I do this in my data to make sure it's working. We're going to set it to the username because that's the state that we're playing with. And I can erase this here. I don't want it hard coded. And with the dummy database, I want to set it to some sort of user index or user even, I can call it, but I'll call it user index, or better yet, I'll call it user object, OBJ. And this should return this user object if we've done this successfully. So it should delete anything else in the database if there's more users. Not actually delete them, but it'll just return this object for us if it's done it successfully. So maybe I'll add another user just to show, and we'll call this one Allison, and password will be 789. And let's console log user object. So I'll pull open the console. Let's refresh. Let's search for pags. And you can see that it didn't pull up John. It didn't pull up Allison. It pulled up this object, user ID pags with password 123. If I have another bunch of characters with it, shouldn't pull up anything. See how it said undefined that time. if I put in a username named John, it'll pull up John's object with password 456. So that's step one, is handle submit, find the user. The next step we want to do is check if user's password matches the state, password state. And that's kind of what we want to do next. So we take our user object and we want to find the password. If it equals the state, return it. And I'm going to go ahead and console log this for us to see what it's saying. And again, because our states are named the same, we have password ID, or excuse me, password from state and password in the database. I'm going to rename password in the database to something else. Now, in real practice, I would keep this all the same, but I just want us to differentiate these two items. So that means this needs to change, because the user object is no longer going to be password. It's going to be user password ID. User object password ID. So I can go ahead and put in 123 and let's see what it says. True. So it returned that this user does exist in our database, and this user's object password equals what the input was from this user. If I put in 124, which is incorrect, it should return false. Just like that. That's a Boolean value that we can adjust now and set our variable, is the user authenticated? Has the user provided the credentials that lets them know that this is really an account that exists on the server or the database, and that the password matches them? So I'm going to go ahead and say const authenticated. We'll set a new variable and set authenticated to a Boolean value. And first, it'll always be false. I'm going to default that every user who's on this page is always going to be not authenticated first. So all we need to do, instead of returning this, is just set our authentication to this. And I'm going to go ahead and delete this. What this is doing now is it'll let us know if the user's authenticated. And I'm going to go ahead and, do you see our username and password state? I'm going to go ahead and move that up. And I'm going to put it at the top of the file. And in fact, we're going to say margin Y8. And we're going to add one more thing here. Are they authenticated? This is going to be a Boolean value depending on, excuse me, I have a typo here, missing one quote. And this is a ternary, which is going to be the first thing. If the ternary value is true, it'll return the first thing. If the ternary value is false, it will return the second thing. We're going to use this to conditionally render whether we want to show the first thing or the second thing. So basically, if I say true, it'll show the first thing. And this is the first thing. If I say false, it'll show the second thing. And that's the second thing on screen. All we're doing is using the same true false value here, but we just named it. We just fancy dancy named it to authenticate it. That's all. So I'm just swapping that variable out, that Boolean value, which is really just this. And if I choose true here, we'll see the first thing, which is this guy. And if I name it false here, change the Boolean value to false, we'll see the second thing. That's a little bit about Boolean values and ternaries and how we're using it as a switch. Basically, I'm saying user is authenticated, invalid credentials. That's how I want to use this for right now. When you land on the page, we're going to say invalid credentials. And I'm going to enter the name Pags. And let's just go ahead and hit enter. We see nothing changes. But if I press 1, 2, 3, we should see this change from invalid credentials to is authenticated. Let's see. Great. Nice work, guys. And with this authenticated variable, now we can build stuff with our entire application. We know it's working. We know we can log in. We know we have some sort of authentication. And I'm going to go ahead and delete all of these stateful variables on our screen. So we're just left with our login page. Maybe I'll rearrange a few things here and say, we're going to name this my app homepage, or landing page rather. And let's wrap this entire thing in fragments. I'm going to go down here to the bottom and do this. all this material here should represent one of our pages, and it's our landing page. Now let's build another page here. And we're getting this error here because we need to wrap everything in fragments. So I'm going to double wrap another set of fragments around the entire application. And the idea is I can build a new page up here. So new page. I don't want it there, and I don't want our users to see it yet. Let me steal this div from our previous. Let me close it off. And we'll say app page, app homepage. So we can see that we have an app homepage, and let me make it a different color. So say blue 300. And we have our landing page, but we don't want the user to see both of them. We only want them to see the app homepage if they're authenticated. So how I'm going to do that is wrap this first page here, and I'm going to wrap it in an object. These are the curly brackets. And I want to take this here, and you can see that it's done nothing to our application if I wrap them in a curly object. But what I can do now is insert authenticated into here and press and. So our users, if we refresh the page, currently we are authenticated, but if I refresh the page, we are no longer authenticated. Our Boolean value defaults back to false. But again, if we say true, now we can see our home page. And we'll hide the landing page here in a second. Let me flip it back to false, and let's refresh the application, make sure that our state is all up to date. And I'm going to do the same thing here, from our fragments to our fragments. Just the first pair, because the outer fragments are wrapping both these pages. I hope you guys can see this clearly. And I'm going to wrap this in more curlies, and I'm going to say authentic and. But now I see nothing. And the reason is because we're not authenticated. But how can we authenticate ourselves if we can't see the landing page? Well, what I want to do here is put an exclamation point, which means the opposite of authenticated. This is how we're using authentication here. So if I go ahead and say pags and do 1, 2, 3, we should see us log into the application. Let's see. And here's our app homepage. Let's build a logout button. So I took the button from the previous page and I want to say logout. And instead of handle submit, we're going to have a logout function. Handle logout, and all this logout function can do is set the username null and set authenticated back to false. And let's set the password as well back to nothing. Handle logout. Let's see. And we can get rid of all of our variables here. We're not passing them in. We can actually not even arrow function. We don't need it anymore. So let's log out. So we can log in as pags, and we can enter our password as 1, 2, 3. And we can log into our page. This is a brief idea on authentication. Of course, when we're dealing with real authentication, and let's log out and let me show you. We have our dummy database right here. And let me remove this true value and set true value. We have our dummy database, and this is such a microcosm of what true authentication really is. We're going to see so much more with true authentication, where you actually will have a unique user ID. And it's going to be typically a really long string with a whole bunch of other characters. And then you will have a unique username. So it would be Ryan. There's going to be timestamps more than likely when someone logged in, which time zones and time that they did. There's a lot to do with it. And the password as well isn't going to be stored in the database like this. It'll actually be hashed. And so maybe the password is 1, 2, 3, but it's going to go through a hashing function, where the hashing function is going to change the looks of this password. So the computer is going to know that it's going to be 1, 2, 3, but we'll see it in the database like something like this. So we can't actually see what the password really is if the data were to be leaked. There's a few other things that authentication will also have, like the role of admin or a customer, and so much more. These are just a few concepts to authenticate. I just wanted to show the approach of how to look at authentication, because I was never really taught it in a easy constructible way of, okay, fundamentally what we're doing, even on this fancy dancy level, fundamentally all we're doing is we're finding a user with this user ID and we're checking that they exist. And Then we're going to go to find the password, and of course, authentication is going to decrypt it in a fancy way. That's authentication. Thanks for watching, guys. Thank you so much for watching my software engineering course. If you enjoyed that module, there's more in the description below. Just a little bit of a sneak peek about how I teach and stuff that I've learned. I hope you enjoyed, and there's definitely more on the way.